$1 million. That's all it took to make a poor ex-soldier almost betray the only man who ever believed in him. In a country scarred by foreign interference, corruption, and silent war, Traoré, the people's president, was one signature away from losing everything. But when the briefcase was opened, something else came out. Something no one expected. The door slammed shut behind him like a prison gate. Tamba Dumbia stood still, blinking into the darkness. The room was cold, no windows, no clocks, no noise. Only the faint hum of a fluorescent light flickering overhead, casting an eerie pulse on the walls. His wrists were raw. They'd cuffed him too tight. His shirt clung to his back, soaked in sweat. Not fear, not yet, but confusion, disbelief, and somewhere deep down, dread. The metal chair screeched as they shoved him into it. Across the table sat two men, foreign. Their suits didn't match their accents, sharp tongues colder than their icy expressions. Their eyes scanned him like he was already guilty. One opened a black folder. The other spoke first. Tamba Dumbia, former elite guard, trusted companion of President Ibrahim Traoré, father of one, son of a diabetic mother. Low bank balance. No formal employment in the last 11 months. Tamba's throat tightened. We know more about you than your own government does. The man continued, smiling without warmth. We also know the president has quietly relocated his family. Off the record. No one knows where they are. Not even his own ministers. The second man leaned forward, placing a briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. The sound echoed. Tamba's eyes darted to it. The metal gleamed, not new, not old. Well-traveled, well-planned. $1 million, the first man said, tapping the lid. In clean currency. No questions asked, no strings except one. Just tell us where they are. Coordinates, that's it. The second man opened the briefcase with a soft click. It wasn't the sight of the money that made Tamba freeze. It was the smell. Clean, sterile, like disinfected paper, as if it had never belonged to anyone. There it was, stacks and stacks of $100 bills, perfectly aligned like soldiers waiting for a command. But then the agent slid something else across the table, a photograph, and that hit harder than the money. Ibrahim's face, younger, smiling. The two of them together, arms slung over each other's shoulders, grinning with the kind of trust only childhood gives. Behind them, the mango tree they planted at 13. Below the photo, Ibrahim's wife, his daughter. Their smiles were softer, unaware, unprepared. You know where they are. You were on the relocation team. It's not treason, the man said casually, like ordering tea. It's survival. Your country's already failing. Your president can't save it. But you can save yourself. Tamba's mouth went dry. He could almost hear Miriam's voice, his daughter, whispering. Last week, Papa, they said I can't go on the field trip unless we pay this week. He'd lied, said he'd figure it out. His mother's insulin was overdue. She'd been rationing her doses. Last night she coughed blood, and here it was, the answer. In a box, on a table, in a room where no one else would ever know. The lights above flickered. The agent said nothing more. Silence. A silence that felt like a trap. His fingers twitched on the table. Could he do it? Just say a few words. Read off an address. Walk out a millionaire. Start over. Maybe in Côte d'Ivoire or Morocco. Change his name. Send Miriam to a private school. Buy his mother a doctor, not just medicine. He looked at the photograph again. Ibrahim's eyes stared back, not accusing, not pleading, just trusting. Too trusting. That was the worst part. Time's ticking, Dumbia, one agent murmured. There are other men like you. We'll find one. But they won't get paid this well. Tamba clenched his fist beneath the table. He hadn't said a word yet. But inside, a war had started, brutal, quiet, and terrifying. The moment the photo touched the table, it cracked something loose in Tamba's chest. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the threat. It was that picture, two boys barefoot, covered in dust, eyes lit with mischief. Koudagou, years ago, a town of goats' clay walls and mango trees, of rusted water pumps and dusty laughter. Back then, they raced each other barefoot across the dry fields behind the mosque, stealing eggs from old Mama Soli's chickens and splitting them raw behind the broken school wall. Ibrahim was the fast one, taller, wiry, with a fire in his eyes even then. Tamba was stronger, slower, always a step behind, but always chasing, always following. "You'll be president one day," Tamba had joked once, huffing after another failed race. Ibrahim had grinned, teeth flashing. "Not if I don't survive your cooking first." But there were nights, quiet ones, when Ibrahim grew still, his voice dropping to that strange grown-up depth he hadn't earned yet. "I don't want to hold a gun, Tam. Not like your uncle. I want to fight with words. Build something." Tamba had laughed. "Then you'll need someone beside you. Someone with fists." No, Ibrahim had said. "I'll need someone with heart." It was one of those moments that stuck, like a pebble under the skin. Years later, that fire in Ibrahim's eyes had become speeches, movements, people marching, risking, believing. And beside him, always for as long as it was possible, stood Tamba, bulletproof vest, quiet shadow, loyal fist, until the regime turned, until the price of loyalty became too high to afford. Back in the interrogation room, the agents were watching him, not pushing, just waiting, like fishermen with too much experience to rush the hook. One of them slid something else across the table. A small black phone, burner, untraceable. "Call the number. Say the word gold." That's it. Simple. Tamba stared at it. The phone was nothing, weightless plastic, but it burned in his hand like fire. He said nothing. They didn't need him to speak. He stood, not rushed, not angry, just slow, like his body was listening for something his brain hadn't processed yet. The briefcase clicked shut in his hand. The agents opened the door without a word. The hallway outside was colder than before, or maybe he just felt it more now. The guards didn't even look at him as he walked past. Not a criminal, not a hero, just a man in the middle of a decision. His steps were steady, but his hands, they trembled. Only slightly. Enough that he slipped the briefcase to his left hand to hide it. He stepped outside. The light nearly blinded him. Sunlight in Ouagadougou always hit hard after darkness. It didn't ease into you. It attacked. It made you squint and sweat and blink, like you were waking from something or walking into something worse. Tamba stood there for a moment. The sound of traffic voices, motorbikes weaving through chaos. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. He thought about calling the number, just to see, just to hear what it felt like to say the word. Gold. It would only take 3 seconds. He could walk away. New name, new life. His daughter in a better school. His mother with real medicine. No more begging for side jobs from former soldiers with broken knees and broken dreams. But then he remembered something Ibrahim once said years ago, just before his first public speech. "They will offer me death or power, and I will need someone who remembers who I was before both." Tamba closed his eyes. He took a breath. He didn't call. Not yet. Instead, he walked into the light briefcase in hand, the weight of it, not just currency but consequence. And somewhere deep in his chest, that pebble of memory, that dusty promise between two boys in Kudugu, began to press a little harder against the skin. The sun outside hit like judgment. No clouds, no breeze. Just dry, flat heat pressing against Tamba's skin as he stepped into the alley behind the gray building, the briefcase still clutched in his hand, like something radioactive. The walls around him were crumbling concrete, stained by years of dust and neglect, a forgotten corner, in a city that never cared much for what it couldn't see. He checked over his shoulder once. No one followed. The alley was silent save for the faint rattle of a plastic bag caught in barbed wire, and the sound of his own breathing, shallow, dry. His boots stirred up little clouds of reddish dust with each step. Kudugu dust, childhood dust, the kind that never quite leaves your lungs. Tamba knelt, placed the briefcase on the ground, and opened it. For a second, it almost looked beautiful. The money gleamed, not in a poetic way, not like salvation or hope, but like polished danger. Each bundle was pristine, tightly bound, arranged with inhuman precision. Stacked order in a disordered life. He stared. In the alley's quiet, the open case looked like a trap from a fairy tale. The kind that appears when you're starving, when your fingers tremble, when your reasons feel heavier than your morals. His phone buzzed. Tamba flinched. He pulled it from his pocket, cracked screen, old casing, and read the message. "Papa, did you find work today?" It was from Miriam. Short, simple. Like she didn't want to pressure him but hoped anyway. Like she believed still. That belief crushed harder than the heat. He didn't answer. He stared at the screen until it dimmed, the words vanishing into black. Then he looked back at the money. One brief message, one briefcase, one life unraveling quietly in an alley no one would ever care about. Tamba exhaled through his nose slowly, like letting out the pressure of 1,000 sleepless nights. He closed the briefcase, not slammed, not snapped shut. Gently, like he was tucking something in for the night, as if loudness might make the decision more real. His hands hovered for a second over the metal handle. Then he stood. From above, sunlight sliced through a rusted grate, casting long shadows across the alley floor. They looked like bars, like a cage. His stomach growled loud in the silence. He hadn't eaten since the morning, just water and worry. But the hunger wasn't in his gut, it was in his head. The kind of hunger that came from knowing the cost of things, from seeing what's offered and knowing it's not free. He stared at the briefcase on the ground. He didn't pick it up, not yet. Instead, he stepped back, not out of fear, out of respect, because somewhere inside him, deeper than doubt, deeper than poverty, deeper even than the father or the son, a war had started. No rifles, no flags, just memory versus need, honor versus survival, and it was far from over. The dust swirled, the silence thickened, and Tamba stood there between choice and consequence, caught in the stillness of a moment that might change everything. By the time Tamba reached the edge of Sector 15, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting long, crooked shadows through the narrow alleyways. Kudugu dust still clung to his boots, and the briefcase in his hand had grown heavier with each step, not in weight, but in meaning. The neighborhood was quiet. Laundry flapped lazily on lines strung between concrete walls. The scent of charcoal smoke and simmering okra stew floated in the air. Children played with a flat soccer ball in the dirt, their laughter shrill and innocent. As he stepped through the iron gate of his family compound, the familiar creak made his chest tighten. Home was a 2-room cinder block box with peeling paint rusted hinges and a single papaya tree out front that hadn't borne fruit in years. His mother called it her hope tree. She was seated on the woven mat near the front door, folding laundry slowly, carefully, as if her hands couldn't afford to rush anymore. Her back was slightly hunched now, her hair wrapped in a faded blue scarf. Her eyes, once sharp and unrelenting, were dimmer now, but not blind. She looked up as he approached. Her gaze dropped instantly to the briefcase, and then it stopped there. Frozen. No questions. Just silence. "You brought that here," she asked, her voice brittle like the air, before Harmat and Wen's, cutting without volume. Tamba didn't answer. He stepped inside, placing the briefcase by the wall away from the window. He dug into his bag, pulled out the insulin vials wrapped in tissue, and laid them gently on the table beside her prayer beads. She didn't look at them. "Medicine doesn't fix shame," she said. He paused, his hand still hovering above the bottles. "Maman, I didn't, not yet." She cut in, her voice not rising, not falling. "But the weight of a choice begins the moment you carry it." He sat beside her on the mat, but the space between them felt miles wide, a world apart. The only sound was the buzz of a mosquito and the distant clang of someone hammering sheet metal. She unfolded a shirt, refolded it. Then another. And another. "Ibrahim used to come here after school," she said, not looking at him. "He was always so polite. Ate everything I made, even when it was burned. Always said thank you." Tamba stayed quiet. There were no words that didn't sound like excuses. "You think I don't know what that case means?" she continued, now folding his old military trousers. "Men come back from war with blood on their hands. But this is something else. This is blood you haven't spilled yet, but already carry in your shadow." He looked down at his hands. Strong hands. Calloused. Once steady. Now trembling with quiet, invisible storms. "You don't have to understand, Mama," he said finally. "Just, I wanted you to be okay. The medicine, the bills, Miriam's school." She turned toward him slowly, as if the motion itself required willpower. "Do you think I would take breath bought with betrayal?" she asked. "You insult me." Her eyes weren't angry. That would have been easier. Instead, they were tired, disappointed, worse than rage. "Do what you must," she said, rising slowly. But don't bring it here. If you cross that line, leave your soul outside with your boots." And then she turned, not storming off, not slamming doors. She simply walked into the back room and pulled the curtain closed behind her. That sound, the soft whisper of cloth sliding on wire, cut deeper than any slap. Tamba sat still. The vials on the table glistened faintly under the fading light. The briefcase sat against the wall like a coiled snake. And somewhere behind the curtain, his mother lay facing the wall. She knew, and in her silence, Tamba heard a verdict. The house had gone quiet like it always did after his mother spoke. Not the kind of silence that invited rest, but the kind that settled into the cracks of the walls, the kind that hummed with memory. Tamba sat on the mat long after the curtain fell between them. Outside, the sky was bleeding into dusk, and the heat had shifted into a drier, dustier weight. Shadows stretched like fingers across the floor. His eyes drifted toward the corner, where the floor met the old papyrus rug that had faded with years. That corner, worn smooth from habit, still held something. He reached forward, rolled the mat back. There beneath a loose tile was the edge of a wooden panel. It creaked faintly when he lifted it, same way it had creaked the first time years ago when he'd carved the compartment himself. Inside, a cloth bundle wrapped in twine. He exhaled. Unrolling the fabric with care, as if it could shatter, Tamba revealed a dozen folded papers, yellowed, frayed at the edges, the ink smudged in places from time sweat, and maybe once or twice, tears. Ibrahim's letters, not official orders, not politics, not speeches, just words. Real human trembling words. The first one began simply, "Tamba, my brother, I write this before I forget what we're fighting for." Tamba read slowly, his eyes scanning the familiar slant of Ibrahim's handwriting, a little uneven, always leaning forward as if the words couldn't wait to get out. Some letters were written from the jungle camps where they trained barefoot, others from hotel rooms before major speeches, one from a prison cell during the first failed coup attempt. And yet, they all carried the same heartbeat. "If I ever grow cold, bring me fire. If my voice begins to echo empty halls instead of crowded streets, remind me what our people sound like. Don't let power make me blind. And if it does break the windows," Tamba's hands trembled. He turned another page. "We came from nothing, Tam. Dust and mango pits. But the world doesn't scare me because I knew you were behind me." His throat tightened. That sentence struck deeper than he expected. It was a reminder not of how close they had once been, but of how far apart they'd become. He picked up another sheet folded into quarters. This one was stained with something reddish, palm sauce maybe, and written during a rainstorm from the look of the bleeding ink. "I saw a child today with a plastic bag for shoes. She smiled anyway. That's why I keep going. That's why we must both keep going." The sentence hit harder than the gunshots he once trained to survive. Tamba leaned back against the wall, letter in hand, and let his head rest on the cool plaster. His eyes stung. He blinked fast. He wasn't a man who cried easily, but something in him, something buried bracing, cracked slightly under the weight of the words. Not from guilt, but from grief. Not just for Ibrahim, for himself, for the boy he used to be, for what he might still become. He looked down at the letters now scattered like fragile leaves on the floor. Hope, fury, laughter, resolve. Ibrahim had written them when they still believed revolution came from hearts before guns, when loyalty wasn't tested by hunger, and when the future felt like something they could hold, not hide from. "This isn't about me or you. It never was," read one of the last pages. "But if one of us forgets, may the other remember for both." Tamba stared at that line for a long time. The words didn't judge him. They asked him to remember, and remembering hurt. He gathered the pages carefully, gently sliding them back into their cloth wrapping. But he didn't return them beneath the floor. Not this time. He placed them on the table in plain sight beside the untouched insulin and the unopened briefcase. The light had faded now. Outside, the first stars blinked awake above the city. Inside him, something else was awakening too. Not clarity yet, but tension. A tightening thread between the man he was becoming and the boy who once ran barefoot through Kudugu, believing loyalty could outlast poverty. And perhaps it still could. By morning, the city was already awake, louder than usual, hotter than usual. Ouagadougou pulsed with movement, vendors shouting over each other, motorbikes weaving like fish through waves of people, The smell of fried yam and diesel thick in the air. Tamba moved through it all like a ghost. He didn't wear the suit the agents had left for him, only his usual faded shirt, frayed at the collar, and trousers with a small tear near the knee. But something about him felt different now. People noticed, or maybe they sensed it. Eyes followed him. Subtle at first, then not. At the corner by the post office, a woman selling papayas lowered her voice mid-sentence and looked away. A pair of boys passing on a bicycle slowed down, turned their heads, whispered something between them. He caught phrases here and there. That's him right. Used to guard the president. No one leaves the barracks with a case like that and comes out clean. He kept walking, past the peanut vendor, past the tailor's stall where faded shirts flapped in the breeze like surrendered flags, past a man with one leg seated on a crate who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Then near the spice alley, he saw someone he hadn't expected. Dieng. They had trained together, fought shoulder to shoulder during the convoy riots in Kutugu, laughed over stolen bread, mourned over fallen brothers. Dieng was leaner now, his beard streaked with gray, but his eyes were the same, sharp, scanning everything. Their eyes met. Dieng didn't smile, didn't frown. He just nodded once. Wordless, heavy, recognition without embrace. Then he turned away. That single gesture weighed more than any insult, more than the stares, more than the silence. Tamba kept walking. The sun climbed higher, pressing heat into his back. His steps slowed as he passed a row of school children lined up outside a crumbling classroom, their uniforms mismatched, their sandals worn thin. But they laughed big, bellyful laughs at something only they could understand. One little boy, maybe 6, pointed at Tamba and shouted with glee, "You look rich, uncle." The others burst into giggles. Tamba forced a smile. He even raised a hand, but the moment passed too fast and the laugh too loud. It echoed in his chest like a hollow drum. He walked on the weight of memory, pressing harder than the sun. He passed the statue in the center of the square, the old soldier cast in bronze holding a rifle in one hand and a child in the other. The metal had dulled over time, stained by rain and pigeon droppings, but still it stood a frozen echo of sacrifice. Tamba stopped, stared up at it. He remembered the first time Ibrahim stood beneath that very statue, fists clenched, voice clear. The child must matter more than the gun. The words came back sharp, too sharp, like they'd never left. Tamba took a deep breath. The city pulsed on. Life moved. Markets screamed. But inside him a quiet war dragged its feet through mud. He turned from the statue and walked away, not fast, not slow, but with the gait of a man carrying something heavier than gold. Something shaped like shame. Miriam didn't say anything when she came home from school that afternoon. No usual call of Papa from the gate. No bouncing footsteps on the dusty path. Just the creak of the latch and the soft drag of her feet on the tile floor. Tamba noticed right away. He looked up from the table where he'd been reading one of Ibrahim's old letters again, now stained with thumbprints and time, and saw her silhouette in the doorway, framed by the fading light. She looked smaller today, not by size, by weight. Her backpack hung awkwardly off one shoulder. Her braids were frayed at the edges. Her chin dipped a little lower than usual. He stood. "Mariam, ma chérie." What happened? She paused, hesitated for a heartbeat too long, then dropped her bag onto the floor with a muffled thud. "It's fine," she said, but her voice had lost its spring, the one that usually danced between words. Tamba stepped forward, crouched, and gently opened her bag. Between her notebooks and pencil case was something heavy and unfamiliar. A stone, palm-sized, sharp-edged, dirty. He lifted it with 2 fingers slowly, as if it were made of fire. "Who put this in here?" Miriam looked away. "A boy in my class," she mumbled. "His brother says you're a traitor, so I must be one too." The words didn't come out angry. They came out tired. Too tired for a child. Tamba's stomach twisted. "Did he hit you?" She shook her head. Threw it. Missed. But he laughed. Everyone laughed. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She clenched her fists, tucked them into her sleeves like she was afraid they might act on their own. "I didn't cry," she added. "You said to be strong, remember?" Tamba knelt beside her, unsure of what to say. He wanted to say, "I'm sorry," but the words felt too thin. He wanted to say, "They're wrong," but even that sounded like a lie he hadn't fully earned yet. Instead, he put the stone down on the table beside the insulin, and the letters, and the still unopened briefcase, each one its own kind of weight. He reached out, brushing her cheek gently. "You shouldn't have to be strong, Miriam." "Not like that." She didn't answer. She simply walked into the bedroom and closed the door softly behind her. That night, Tamba stood in the doorway, watching her sleep. She lay curled up, one arm wrapped around her pillow, her small chest rising and falling with a rhythm only children have, pure quiet, untouched by the chaos outside. A stuffed giraffe peeked out from under the sheets, worn, but loved. The moonlight slid through the broken shutter and fell across her face, and he just stood there, watching, listening, remembering. She was the reason he'd even considered taking the deal. The reason he let that briefcase into his hands, into his home. Not because he didn't love his country or Ibrahim or loyalty itself, but because he loved her more. Because her world was the one thing he still wanted to protect, even if it meant burning down everything he once believed in. But now, looking at her, hearing the soft sounds of her breath, seeing the faint red mark on her elbow, where she must have scraped it on the school wall, he realized something worse. Even silence could leave a scar. Even almost betrayal had a ripple. He walked back into the other room. The stone still sat where he left it, next to the money, next to the past, next to the promises. He stared at it for a long time, not because it hurt her, but because in some small way it had come from him. And that was the real wound. The boy came just after sunset. Tamba was fixing the kitchen window when he heard the knock. 2 soft taps, then silence. He opened the door and found a boy no older than 10, barefoot, dusty, gripping the handlebars of a rusty bicycle. The boy didn't speak. He simply extended a small folded paper and pedaled away before Tamba could even ask his name. The note was plain. No seal, no signature. Just a location, a time, and 2 words. No guards. His heart skipped once, then again. He arrived just before the hour, walking alone through side streets lined with jacaranda trees and closed storefronts. The building was small, a private study tucked behind an old tailor's shop, half concealed by vines, and quiet. The kind of place no one would think to search precisely because it had nothing to hide. He stepped inside. The door creaked softly behind him, and there, seated at a narrow wooden table beside a teapot and 2 cups, was Ibrahim. Not in uniform, not surrounded by advisors. Just him. The same boy Tamba had raced through Kutugu with. The same man who had stood on a podium and promised justice to a nation. His beard was fuller now, and his eyes held years Tamba had missed, but the way he looked up was the same. He didn't rise. He just nodded once. "You came." Tamba lowered his eyes, unsure how to start. "I wasn't followed." Ibrahim poured tea into both cups. The aroma of mint and ginger filled the room. For a long moment they sat in silence, steam rising between them like fog neither of them dared to clear. Then Tamba spoke. Slowly, they approached me, in a room with no windows. 2 men, foreign. They offered money, a new life, for your family's location. He paused. The words hung heavy like wet cloth. I listened, but I said nothing. No defense, no explanations, just truth. Ibrahim didn't flinch. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, hands clasped in front of him, eyes never leaving Tamba's. "I knew," he said softly. "They're not subtle. They were counting on your hunger." Tamba winced. It wasn't hunger. No, Ibrahim tilted his head. Then what was it? Tamba didn't answer right away. He thought of Miriam's scraped elbow, of his mother's silence, of the unopened briefcase, of the stone in his daughter's backpack. "Fear," he said finally. "Not for myself. For what this country does to children who believe in the wrong things." Ibrahim let that sit. Then he reached for his cup, sipped, once set it down. "You didn't come here to explain," he said. "You came to see if I still saw you." Tamba swallowed. "Do you?" Ibrahim's gaze was steady. Not warm, not cold, just searching. "I needed to look into your eyes," he said. "Now I have." He stood slowly, walked to the window, pulled aside the curtain, just enough to glimpse the street, empty, quiet, forgettable. "The men who want me gone aren't afraid of my speeches. They're afraid of the ones who stand beside me and don't speak, because silence is hard to trace, harder to kill. Tamba lowered his eyes again. I'm not sure which side I'm on anymore. Ibrahim turned from the window, walked back and placed a small slip of paper beside the untouched teacup. It had no name, just coordinates. In case you ever need to find us, the real us, not the version they want to buy. Tamba looked at the paper, then up at him, but Ibrahim was already walking toward the door. No verdict, he said, hand on the knob, just silence, and then he left, leaving Tamba alone, 2 teacups still warm, and the space between truth and betrayal still echoing with the sound of unspoken forgiveness. The folder landed on the desk with a flat, decisive sound. Not loud, just final. Ibrahim stared at it for a moment before opening it, his fingertips lingering longer than necessary on the corner. He already knew what it contained, or thought he did. Inside 4 surveillance photos, a map and a report marked with the seal of the Internal Bureau. The photos were grainy but clear enough. A school gate, a child stepping outside in a blue and white uniform, a man, not a parent, standing across the street pretending to buy roasted corn. Then again the same man days later, leaning against a motorbike near a kiosk, eyes following the same child. His child, Amina. His throat tightened. He flipped the page. A note from the head of security. We intercepted chatter suggesting an attempt to leverage the child for strategic influence. Possible connection to recent foreign agent activity. Orders. Ibrahim closed the folder slowly. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he rose from his chair and crossed to the small wooden cabinet by the window. From the bottom drawer beneath a pile of old maps and discolored files, he pulled out a bundle wrapped in string. Letters. Not just any letters, Tamba's. Old folded smudge with red sand from their training camps in the north. He hadn't looked at them in years. He slid one out and unfolded it with care. The paper crackled softly, its creases worn thin by time and heat. The ink had faded in parts, but one line still stood out sharp as ever. I was never tempted by power, only by fear. Ibrahim sat back down. He read the line again, and again. The room around him was still. His guards were outside, unaware. The noise of the city had dulled under the weight of evening. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, hands pressed together, the folder on one side, the letter on the other. It wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It never had been. It was about falling, and what a man does afterward. He thought of Tamba, the hesitation in his eyes during their meeting, the heaviness in his voice. A man torn, not lost. A man who had stood in the line of fire without blinking until his child was the one behind the line. Fear could do that. Not greed, not ambition. Fear. Ibrahim whispered the words aloud as if testing them in the air. If I punish all who fall. He paused, looked down at the photo of his daughter again, her eyes bright, her bag too big for her back, then back to the letter. Traoré, who will walk beside me when I do? The question sat there unanswered because he knew. He would fall someday. Every man in power did. And when that moment came, he wouldn't need angels. He would need people who had broken and stood back up. He would need Tamba. The folder remained open. The security report was never signed. And the letter, that single page scrawled with shaky handwriting and silent confession, was placed gently in Ibrahim's jacket pocket close to his heart, where it belonged. It started with a ping, then another, and another. Within minutes, Tamba's old phone buzzed nonstop, messages, missed calls, group chats exploding with activity. He frowned, picked it up, expecting some local rumor or market fire. Instead, he saw his own face, frozen, blurry, framed in the grainy glow of a dimly lit room. Then it moved. He hit play. I confessed to betraying President Traoré. I gave them what they wanted. His voice, or what sounded like it, echoed flatly from the small screen. He watched his own mouth form words he had never spoken. The background, the same room from the interrogation weeks ago. The voice almost perfect. Just a fraction too smooth. The confession damning. He dropped the phone. At that very moment across the city, the video spread like oil and fire. Within an hour, it hit the local news pages, then the influencers, then WhatsApp threads in every corner of the country. By midday, it was everywhere. Former presidential guard sells out leader Tamba Dumbia's secret confession leak. Burkina betrayer trended in 4 languages. People clipped the worst lines. Memes emerged with photoshopped bags of cash, mock interviews, dancing traders, with Tamba's face pasted crudely on top. A TikTok video used his confession over a beat, and it went viral in hours. Tamba couldn't move. He just sat there staring at the screen, watching as the city turned on him, not with evidence, but with pixels. The knock at the door came like thunder. His mother opened it. It was Mariam. Her eyes were red. Tamba rushed forward, confused. "What happened?" She didn't speak. She just reached into her backpack, lighter now, and pulled out a letter from her school. "Suspension. They said I caused a disturbance," she whispered. "The teacher said it's for my safety. But the girls," they laughed. "They said I was the daughter of the snake." Tamba's heart stopped. "They pulled me out, Papa," she said. In front of everyone. The girl who didn't cry when hit with a stone now stood shaking, not with sadness, but humiliation. The truth didn't matter. The video was too real, too perfect. In a world where trust was fragile and digital noise louder than voices, perception had already become fact. His mother sat in the corner, silent again. But this silence was different, not disappointment. It was fear. She knew what happened when the mob chose its villain. It didn't ask questions. It didn't wait for courts. "We have to go," she said quietly. "Tonight, before the streets forget decency." But Tamba didn't move. He couldn't. He had survived war. He had faced bullets. But this was a different kind of weapon. A knife made of pixels, sharpened by rage, swung by invisible hands behind screens. He opened his phone again, scrolling through the storm. Memes, death threats, even old neighbors weighing in. Never trusted him. He always looked like a coward. "I heard he fled the base with diamonds once. Ibrahim is too soft. This traitor must hang." He dropped the phone. Mariam sat beside him, head on his arm, the silence between them, filled with everything he wanted to say, but couldn't. Outside, the city buzzed, not with guns, but with the digital roar of judgment. And deep inside that chaos, truth was no longer a shield, it was a whisper, swallowed by the algorithm. The room was dim, the curtains drawn to muffle the outside world. But even thick fabric couldn't block out the tension pressing against the windows, like the country itself was holding its breath, waiting to see which way the wind would shift. Ibrahim sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his hands steepled beneath his chin. Around him, his most trusted counsel generals, ministers, legal advisors, veterans, and revolutionaries. The air buzzed with hushed arguments, clipped phrases, and tight jaws. The video still played in the background, muted now, but looping endlessly on a cracked screen in the corner. Tamba's face, Tamba's voice, Tamba's betrayal. Or so the world believed. The Minister of Communications, a thin man with sharp cuffs and a sharper tongue, leaned forward. "If we delay, we look weak. The people demand action. Arrest him at the very least. Make a public statement. Silence only feeds the fire." General Doumbia slammed his palm on the table. "And if we act too fast, we kill loyalty. Every soldier will ask, 'What if I'm next?' This isn't just about Tamba, it's about the principle, about how we treat those who stood in front of bullets for us." Another voice chimed in from the shadows, the justice minister. "With the video out, even the truth feels suspicious. If we defend him and it turns out he did speak, we collapse." The arguments tangled like vines. Treason, perception, optics, control. But Ibrahim stayed quiet. He sipped his tea, lukewarm now, and stared at the folder still lying unopened in front of him. He didn't need to open it. He knew what it said. His own intelligence team had already confirmed the video was doctored. Masterfully, yes. Persuasively, but fake. Still, no one believed the truth. Not yet. And that was the war he now fought, not against rebels or foreign agents, but against momentum, against rage that didn't wait for evidence. "They want a symbol," he finally said, his voice calm, but iron beneath. "And symbols die faster than men." The room stilled. "If we sacrifice him now, we confirm the lie. Not just about him, about us, about our values." The communications minister shook his head. "We don't have the luxury of waiting for truth to walk. Lies run faster." Ibrahim looked at him, gaze steady. "Then we must teach truth to fly." A silence spread, heavy, uncomfortable, filled with the weight of unsaid consequences. He leaned back in his chair, let the hum of the city seep through the walls. I will not make a martyr of a man who stood beside me in fire. I will not reward those who craft shadows and sell them as facts. Someone whispered, "It will cost you support." Ibrahim nodded. "Then let it cost me." His voice was soft, not weak, not retreating, just waiting. Because this was not fear, it was restraint. He had learned that the loudest roar wasn't always the one shouted from podiums or into microphones. Sometimes it was the one that grew in the silence when a people realized they had judged too quickly. He stood. "Let them whisper," he said, moving toward the window. "Because when the truth finally speaks, it won't whisper back. It will roar." The steps leading into the National Forum were wide and gray, lined with flags that fluttered listlessly in the wind. It was just after noon, and the sun bore down with quiet fury. The plaza was oddly still, no cheering crowds, no protests, just silence and a camera crew. Tamba walked alone. No guards, no escort, no jacket to hide sweat. Just him, the briefcase in his left hand, and the weight of a nation's suspicion pressing into his spine. Inside the room hummed with a low tension. Dozens of ministers, community leaders, and student delegates filled the half-circle chamber. Their murmurs hushed the moment he stepped through the double doors. Above them, cameras hung like eyes. A national broadcaster was streaming this live. No filter, no delay. The country was watching. Some in the audience stiffened. Others turned away. A few didn't hide their sneers. He climbed the 3 shallow steps to the speaking platform. A single wooden table stood at its center. No microphone, no paper, no nameplate, just air. Tamba set the briefcase on the table gently, deliberately, and let the click of its metal clasps echo across the room as he opened it. Cash, still packed tight, neat rows, stacks of betrayal that had never been spent. He didn't touch it, didn't gesture to it, just looked out across the room, eyes scanning familiar faces and unfamiliar ones. Some had marched beside him years ago. Others had only read about him through memes and headlines. Then he spoke. "I have nothing to defend," he said, voice steady but stripped of all armor. "But I have something to say." The words floated into the silence, pulled the room inward. "You've seen the video. You've shared the posts. You've forwarded the whispers. Some of you believe them. Some still do. I can't stop that. But this," he motioned slightly toward the case, "this was real. They offered it to me. $1 million. A new life. All I had to do was name the address." Murmurs stirred. He raised a hand not to quiet them, but to hold space. I said nothing. Not because I was brave, but because I was afraid of what would happen to my daughter if I did, and what would happen to my soul if I didn't. A pause. The room leaned in. "The video you saw, it's false." My mouth moved, but my words were never spoken. "The truth has become a costume people can rent and wear long enough to ruin a man." Someone scoffed. Someone else sat forward. Tamba didn't flinch. "I'm not here for your forgiveness, or even your belief. I came because silence became heavier than shame." He reached into his coat and pulled out a single letter. The paper was crease-stained, clearly old. This was written by Ibrahim Traoré when we were boys dreaming of something bigger than ourselves. In it he says, "If I ever grow cold, bring me fire." He let the words settle. I may have hesitated, I may have faltered, but I never forgot the fire. He looked straight into the nearest camera. His eyes did not tremble. "I came here to return this," he said, nodding to the briefcase. "Untouched, unused, unwanted." Then without ceremony he closed it. "And now I leave it in your hands. Not to judge me, but to ask yourselves, what would you have done?" He turned, stepped down, walked through the same doors he entered. No applause, no jeers, just breathless silence. And outside, the wind finally stirred the flags into motion. The next morning, the forum hall was quieter, but not calmer. People had gathered again. The camera crews had returned, this time uninvited. The security presence at the door had doubled. Some officials whispered about a setup. Others expected an arrest. Everyone expected something. No one expected the flash drive. Tamba didn't speak when he entered. He simply walked to the same table as the day before, but this time, instead of a briefcase, he held a small black object between his fingers, barely the size of a thumb. He plugged it into the projector port. The room dimmed, and then voices, not his, but foreign, thick accents, casual cruelty, unaware they'd been recorded. The president trusts him. Childhood loyalty. It's a weakness. You break Tamba, the rest will fall. They'll see even the most loyal can be bought. A pause. Laughter. Then we leak the fake tape. Let the people finish the job for us. The sound wasn't clean. It wavered with static in some places, but the meaning, the intent was clear. I don't care if he talks or not. Once they believe he did, it's over. Silence filled the chamber. He let it sit. Then he played the final quote slower this time. Traoré will hesitate. That's his flaw. His country will call it weakness. And in the silence we'll win. Gasps, shifting bodies. One woman covered her mouth. A councilman dropped his pen. Tamba turned off the recording. No speech this time. He looked across the room, at the men who had questioned him, at the students who had mocked his daughter, at the ministers who had advised Ibrahim to sever ties quickly, publicly, and without mercy. He didn't say, I told you. He didn't have to. Truth had done the talking. At the back of the room, General Doumbia stood, his face always carved from stone, now cracked with something unreadable. Regret, perhaps, or shame. Where did this come from, he asked. Tamba met his gaze. They made the mistake of trusting someone less afraid of them than of losing his country. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't pride. Just fact. The room was still. Then Ibrahim entered, late, deliberate walking, with the calm of a man who had already made peace with both outcome and consequence. He looked at Tamba. They exchanged no words. Just a nod, not of thanks, but of understanding. Then Ibrahim faced the room. You wanted truth, he said simply. Now it's louder than the lie. The statement was brief. The impact was not. In every corner of the nation, from barbershops to bakeries, from universities to dusty village squares, the clip spread. Not a deepfake, not a meme, but truth in its rawest form, unscripted, unpolished, undeniable. It didn't roar. It cut. And for the first time in weeks, silence meant something else entirely. It meant listening. The air in the forum was different now. Not heavy like before, not electric either, just holding. As if the building itself was waiting for someone to speak to, name what had just happened. The projector had gone dark. The flash drive was in Ibrahim's pocket, and Tamba stood still, hands at his sides, breathing just loud enough for the microphone to pick it up. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. I almost broke. He let the sentence hang. Almost. He looked up, scanning the crowd. Some faces were dry-eyed, others not. Some met his gaze with apology, some with shame, some with quiet awe. I didn't resist because I'm strong. I didn't stay silent because I'm proud. I did it because my daughter deserved to grow up in a country where truth mattered more than speed, and loyalty meant more than trending hashtags. He stepped away from the podium, not raising his voice, not asking for applause. I almost broke, he said again, softer this time. But I didn't bend. Silence. A long one. Then a sound. Barely audible at first. A chair scraping. A shift in fabric. A woman stood. Middle-aged. Modest dress. A teacher perhaps. Or a civil servant. Her hands trembled slightly, but she raised her chin and looked Tamba directly in the eyes. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. A second later, a man in uniform rose. Not a high-ranking officer, just a corporal with tired eyes and scuffed boots. He stood beside her. Then another. A young woman with a university badge clipped to her scarf. Then a student still wearing his backpack. Then more, one by one, not in unison but in rhythm. Not rehearsed but real. They didn't clap. They stood. And somehow that was louder. Tamba swallowed hard. He hadn't expected this. He'd come to give the country its truth, not to win it back. He looked to Ibrahim, who hadn't moved. The president's eyes were steady, and in them pride without triumph, forgiveness without conditions, and something more rare than either trust. Tamba turned back to the room, which now stood like a forest, rooted, silent, unshakable. They weren't rising for a hero. He had been one once, maybe. But that wasn't today. Today they stood for a man who had fallen and stood again, who had carried fear, shame, loyalty, and silence, and still found the strength to speak. A man who had no army, no badge, no prepared speech, only truth, only scars, only fire. And somehow that was enough. There were no reporters when they arrived, no drones overhead, no crowd lining the dirt roads with flags or phones. Just Kudugu, quiet, warm, unchanged in all the ways that mattered. The sun pressed low against the horizon, casting long shadows through the acacia trees. Chickens darted across the narrow path, and children's laughter echoed faintly from a nearby well. A goat bleated lazily as a boy tugged it past the rusted sign that still read, "Welcome to Kudugu," though some of the letters had long since faded. Tamba stepped out of the truck first, his boots sinking slightly into the soft red soil. The scent hit him immediately: dry earth, old wood smoke, ripe mango. It wrapped around his chest like an old song, half forgotten. Behind him, Ibrahim climbed down slower than he used to. He carried a burlap sack in one arm, its contents barely visible save for the slender green stem poking from the top. They said nothing for a while. They just stood there, two boys in men's bodies, listening to the village breathe. "It hasn't changed much," Tamba said quietly. "No," Ibrahim replied. "But maybe we have." They made their way past the old well, now patched with cement, and turned toward the far edge of the village, where the mango tree used to stand. The one they had planted as children. The one they had broken climbing, raced around, carved promises into. It was gone. Only a jagged stump remained, gray and cracked, like the ghost of something that had outlived its purpose. Tamba paused before it. He reached down, touched the bark, brittle, sun-bleached. "A storm took," it said, a familiar voice. They turned. An old woman with a walking stick watched them from the shade of a porch. 3 years ago? Lightning. Split it in half. She didn't ask why they were here. She just nodded once and returned inside, as if some part of her had been waiting for them to come finish what they started. Ibrahim stepped forward. From the burlap sack, he pulled a young mango sapling, thin but rooted, green leaves still glistening from the morning mist in the capital. They knelt together, no shovels, just their hands like when they were boys. The soil was warm, soft, alive. They dug slowly, wordlessly, until the hole was deep enough. Tamba cradled the sapling in his palm as Ibrahim pressed the earth around it, patting it down with quiet reverence. Sweat trickled down their foreheads, mixing with red dust in memory. "Do you remember," Ibrahim said, almost a whisper, "what you carved into the old one?" Tamba nodded. "If we climb high enough, we can see the whole world." Ibrahim smiled. "We never did climb high enough." "Maybe we weren't meant to," Tamba said. "Maybe we were just meant to plant better roots." They stood. The tree swayed gently in the breeze, barely taller than Ibrahim's waist. But it stood firm. Behind them, a group of children peeked out from a doorway, whispering, wide-eyed. One boy took a tentative step forward, then another until he reached the tree. He crouched down, touched one of its leaves, then looked up at them. "Will it grow sweet mangoes?" the boy asked. Tamba knelt beside him. "If we take care of it," he said, "it will grow sweeter than any you've ever tasted." The boy nodded, serious. "Then I'll watch it." Ibrahim laughed gently. "Good, that's what it needs." They left without ceremony, just as they came. No headlines, no applause. But behind them, the sapling stood fragile. Yes, young, unproven, but planted. And sometimes that was all that mattered. The soil crumbled softly between Tamba's fingers, still warm from the sun, still loose from where they'd planted the young sapling hours ago. He crouched low, hands dusty to the wrist, gently patting down the edges of the earth surrounding the thin trunk. Each movement was careful, no rush, no spectacle. He didn't notice the boy at first. A pair of dusty toes appeared beside the roots, then a voice high and curious. "Are you the man from TV?" Tamba looked up. The boy couldn't have been older than 8. His shirt hung loose, one button missing. In his right hand, he held a slingshot. His left clutched a half-eaten mango, its juice running down his wrist. Tamba smiled softly. "I guess I am." The boy studied him, tilting his head like he wasn't quite convinced. "You look taller on the screen. Cameras lie." Tamba chuckled, brushing dirt off his knee. "Did you really take the money?" A pause. Tamba didn't flinch. "No." The boy squinted. "But they said a lot of things." Tamba interrupted gently. "Some true, some not. It's easier to shout than to ask." The boy nodded slowly, then pointed at the sapling. Will this grow big if we care for it? Tamba said. Yes, and give it water, and give it time. The boy grinned and sat cross-legged on the ground beside him, slingshot tucked behind his back. Laughter rang out from beyond the trees. A group of children chased each other through the dry grass, kicking up little clouds of red dust. One girl spun in a circle, arms wide, pretending to be an airplane. Another shouted, "You're it," and disappeared behind the old well. Ibrahim stood nearby, leaning against a low fence. He watched it all, the tree, the children, the man who had almost fallen but had chosen to rebuild. This, he said, stepping forward, isn't just for the tree. Tamba looked up. Then who is it for? Ibrahim paused. His gaze drifted toward the horizon where Kutugu's edge blurred into sun and dry fields. For the ones who break, he said, and choose to fix it with their own hands. Tamba's brow furrowed. Ibrahim continued. Some plant trees for shade, others for fruit. But some, he gestured at the sapling plant, because something inside them needs to grow again. They stood in silence, not the kind that pressed, the kind that heals, the kind that listens. Tamba rose slowly, brushing the dirt from his knees. His shirt clung to his back in patches of sweat, but he didn't care. He looked at the sapling, still fragile, its thin leaves fluttering in the wind. Do you think they'll forgive me? He asked, not looking at Ibrahim. I think Ibrahim said you didn't come here for forgiveness. Tamba nodded. He didn't. He came to remember what it felt like to plant something, not destroy, to touch soil, not metal, to be a man, not a weapon. Behind them, the children had started a new game. A race now, two boys darting between trees, shouting in mock protest. The boy with the slingshot tapped Tamba's elbow. Can I help water the tree? Tamba looked at him, then down at the sapling. It's yours now, he said. Make sure it never goes thirsty. The boy beamed, nodded like he'd just been given a kingdom, and ran off to find a tin can. As the sun dipped lower, casting gold across the village, Tamba and Ibrahim began walking back toward the house. No guards, no titles, just two men, one who led a country, one who once nearly betrayed it, and between them roots, not just in the soil, but in memory, in choice, in redemption. The sun had begun its descent behind the trees, painting the sky with a quiet orange that melted into lavender. Kutugu exhaled. The wind stirred through the village like a memory returned, gentle, cool, familiar. Tamba sat cross-legged beside the young mango tree. The earth beneath him was warm, soft where it had been turned. His fingers still held bits of dirt beneath the nails. He didn't bother brushing them clean. A few feet away, Miriam sat quietly, legs tucked beneath her skirt. She had said little since they arrived. No sharp questions, no silent anger. Just presence. Just eyes that had grown older in the months of silence and storm. She held a stick in her hand now, and with quiet focus she leaned forward and began to draw in the dirt. The lines were slow, careful. One stroke, then another. A curve. A pause. Tamba turned toward her, curious but wordless. The dust shifted around her fingers as she traced. When she leaned back, the word was clear, simple, honest. Hope she didn't say anything. She just looked at the tree, still small, still uncertain, then back at the word as if sealing some pact only she understood. Tamba felt something tighten in his chest, then ease like a knot he didn't know he carried, finally loosening. Ibrahim stepped forward and saw the word. He didn't smile, not fully, just pressed his palm gently against his chest, a quiet salute, a moment of reverence. No monument needed, he said softly. Just this. They stood there for a moment longer, the three of them, as the wind rustled through the sapling's young leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played faintly a melody without words. A little girl ran by barefoot, chasing a cloth ball. She paused when she saw the word in the dirt, looked up at Miriam, then smiled and ran again. There was no speech that day, no podium, no declarations. Just soil, wind, and a word. And sometimes that was enough. Tamba stood brushing his palms together. He looked at Miriam, who had stood too, hands dusty but unbothered. Ready? He asked. She nodded once. Ibrahim waited a few paces ahead. No motorcade, no reporters, just a man with lines around his eyes and dust on his shoes. They walked together shoulder to shoulder. Tamba on the left, Ibrahim on the right, not in formation, not as soldier and president, just as two boys grown into men returning from the same place they began. Their strides matched naturally as if they had never unlearned how to move together. Miriam walked a step behind, humming now, a small tune, a lullaby from her grandmother maybe, one she hadn't sung since the rumors, since the silence took hold. As they reached the curve of the path, Tamba looked back once. The sapling stood gently in the breeze, the word hope still visible in the dust beside it. Not carved in stone, not permanent, but written, planted. And if the rains were kind and the roots dug deep and the village remembered to water it, maybe it would last. Maybe the word would fade, but its meaning that would stay. He turned forward again and walked on. The footsteps echoed lightly along the marble halls. It was a weekday morning, and the National Museum buzzed with the low hum of schoolchildren, their voices curbed by the reverent tone of the place. Teachers in khaki uniforms moved alongside them, like shepherds reminding them to stay quiet, not to touch the glass, to stay in pairs. One group slowed as they reached the final exhibit in the Modern Trials wing. Their shoes scuffed gently on the floor as they clustered around a single square pedestal. Encased in glass was a black leather briefcase worn at the edges, its silver clasp dulled with time. No lights flashed, no screen played, no dramatic music. Just the case, still locked, untouched. One girl leaned close, her breath fogging the glass. She pointed at the faded scratches on the handle. "Was this really it?" she whispered. Her friend nodded, eyes wide. "My uncle says it almost broke the whole country." Another boy frowned. "It's just a bag." The teacher approached, tapping the laminated floor gently with her pointer. "Not just a bag," she said quietly. That briefcase carried the weight of a decision. The class leaned in closer. Beneath the display, a brass plaque read, "The briefcase that was never opened. Donated anonymously." "Not everything valuable can be bought," the teacher continued. "He was given this full of money, more than most people would see in a lifetime. All he had to do was say a name. But he didn't. Why, a student asked. Because he remembered who he was and who he stood beside. The room was quiet. Someone took a picture. Someone else simply stared. Far above them, a skylight bathed the case in warm light, not harsh, not golden, just clear, clean. The children were ushered onward toward the gift shop, the exit, the next chapter of the tour. But a few looked back, and for the first time understood the value of what wasn't taken. She had told this story 100 times, maybe more, sometimes to tourists with wide-brimmed hats, sometimes to politicians' children, sometimes to bored teenagers who only perked up when she reached the word million. But today's group was different. They were younger, quieter, and when she began, something in their posture shifted. She stood before the glass case, palms folded. This man Tamba wasn't famous. Not before this. He wasn't perfect. He didn't always know what was right. She glanced toward the plaque. He wasn't a hero. He was scared. He hesitated, but he remembered who he was just in time. The children stood still, the hush of the room almost sacred. One girl raised her hand, hesitating. Did they ever speak again? Him and the president? The guide smiled. It was a practiced smile, not fake but familiar. Earned. They didn't just speak, she said. They planted a tree. Some students looked confused. The girl tilted her head. A real one? The guide nodded. In the village where they grew up. Kudugu. It still grows. The boy beside her asked what kind of tree. Mango. The same one they used to climb as kids. The students looked again at the briefcase as if seeing it new. Not a symbol of greed, but of refusal. And the money, someone asked. Still inside. Gasps. She nodded again. It was never spent. Not one coin. It stayed sealed until the day he walked into this museum and asked us to keep it safe so people wouldn't forget the power of walking away. There were no more questions, just silence, and in it, understanding. The museum closed at 5. By 6, the halls were dark, save for emergency lights glowing soft against the exhibits. The janitor moved slowly, mop in hand, humming an old folk tune that no one remembered the words to. He stopped as he always did before the glass case. The briefcase hadn't moved. Still black. Still scuffed. Still locked. He looked at it not with awe but with familiarity, like an old neighbor he never really talked to, but nodded at each morning. Outside, the city pulsed. Cars honked. Radios played. Restaurants lit up. Children shouted through alleyways. Life went on, but inside the museum, that case remained. No one had ever opened it. No one ever would, because the point was never the money. It was the decision, the one not taken, the betrayal that didn't happen, the call that was never made, the truth that waited even when no one believed. In the silence of the room, the briefcase held more weight than any war medal, more meaning than any speech. It was not a symbol of wealth. It was a symbol of what it means to resist when no one is watching. The janitor leaned his mop against the wall and wiped a small smudge from the glass with his sleeve. Then he looked at the plaque again. Not everything valuable can be bought. He chuckled quietly. Still true, he muttered, then turned off the light. Outside, Kudugu was hundreds of miles away, but a mango tree grew. A word remained hope once traced in the dust, and behind glass in the dark, a black briefcase waited still. Not forgotten, just remembered differently. This story isn't just about loyalty or betrayal. It's about the quiet power of choice, especially the choices we make when no one is watching, when the world expects us to fall, and when doing the right thing offers no reward, except peace with ourselves. Tamba's story isn't perfect. He was afraid. He almost broke. And that's what makes him powerful, not because he was flawless, but because he stopped himself just in time. He chose truth not out of pride, but out of love for his daughter, for his country, and for the boy he once was. The black briefcase behind glass now tells a silent story. It holds no riches anymore. What it carries instead is a legacy of restraint, of courage that isn't loud, and of dignity that doesn't beg for recognition. It reminds us that what we walk away from can define us just as much as what we chase. And perhaps the most moving part of it all isn't the briefcase or the political tension or even the redemption. It's the mango tree, the one planted where a broken one once stood. It grows quietly, watered by a village, watched by children, remembered by two men who once were boys. That tree is us, fragile, still growing, still learning. And like it, we all have the power to root something new, even after storms. In a world that often rewards noise, drama, and extremes, this story whispers, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not act on fear. Question for you. Have you ever faced a moment where doing the right thing meant losing something, but you chose it anyway? Or, if that moment comes in the future, what will you choose to walk away from so that you can stand taller later? Let me know below. I'd love to hear your story. If this story touched, you don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Captain of Truth, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Captain of Truth.